All right, our 845-mile trip has come to an end. Now, a few things that I've learned over the last few years thought I'd share with you, especially when it comes to RVs. Rule number one, always memorize the height of your vehicle, the very peak of it. For when you go into certain tunnels or bridges, there will be a sign, or hopefully there will be a sign that states how tall the bridge is. Now usually that marking that it tells you if it's 13.8 or 13.2 usually means it's at the very apex of the shortest spot, usually on the right hand or left hand side of the bridge or tunnel, usually not at the very top, but don't quote me on that. Always believe that the highest point is that marking for the very top, and with that air conditioner sitting up on top, we're sitting at 13.2. So always remember that you have a height. Rule number one. Number two, you should always know that with your motorhomes, or most motorhomes, that the mirrors actually stick out further than the motorhome does. And when they stick out, you know what your clearance is on the sides. So if you go and bump something with this, say a wall or something, it's a lot cheaper to replace this and stop than to replace the siding of your RV. And this brings me up to rule number three. This rule, actually I didn't learn it. A buddy of mine learned it when he got his trailer. He went out, had his new trailer, had everything hooked up, and when he came back from the trip, he went to go dump his tanks. He was dry camping, and lo and behold, he didn't know, but he didn't check the wastegate checks. Here's the gray, here's the black. Now, before you open that cover, always make sure that your black and gray are closed, because if you open that up and one of these is pulled open, you're gonna have a really rough day. Brings me to rule number four. Not all campsites sometimes have the electricity wired correctly. This is for a lot of different reasons, but you should always carry a toolbox. In my toolbox, I carry something to check for polarity. Now this one is a GFCI tester, but it will do the same thing. It will test to make sure when you plug it in that everything's done right when it comes to the 120 amp. It's also good to have a surge protector. Purchase one of those. Again, that's another added expense, but that is something. On top of that, before I go and touch the box, I use I don't even know what it's called. A circuit tester to check for live wires. Sometimes there's a bare wire that could be touching, and you could get a good shock from it if you don't have one of these. So always check it by touching the box with this prior to touching it, opening it up, putting in your electrical piece. Use one of these. Rule number five. Even though this rule is for safety and making sure that you, in the night, don't kill yourself or walk into a flaming bomb, know that most people in trailers, RVs, anything that has a stove sometimes can get bumped. I've bumped it with my butt a million times. And I can tell you right now, if you have your propane on and you bump one of those, you're going to be releasing propane into your motorhome, RV, trailer, camper, whatever it is. Always check it all the time. When you come in, first thing you check when you open the doors, make sure that's off. Before you go to bed, make sure that these knobs are at the stable position where they're off. You don't want to be sleeping, even with good carbon monoxide detectors, and have that happen. Even with carbon monoxide detectors, which you should check before you leave on every trip, You never want to trust them 100%. I don't trust them 100%. I always make sure that I check and make sure that everything on my on propane is either off or is functioning correctly before I go to sleep. Which brings me to rule number 6. The fridge. 2 worst things in a motorhome or camper or trailer or any RV is the 2 things that can ruin it are mold, which is from water damage, or 2, not being level and is basically fire. So mold and fire. And with fire, one of the biggest spots that you always have to make sure that you're very well attentive to is the refrigerator. Now, our refrigerator claims to go up to 5%. I never believe that. Everyone says 3% is the most or the max that you can be at a grade, at an angle, for it to function properly. Now, we have this always set at around 1% to 0, perfectly level. 2 reasons why is I don't like sleeping on my bed with my head down and getting a headache. And always check that. But the other thing is, with this can cause a fire, the refrigerator. And the reason why is it's an alcohol-based refrigerator. It has alcohol or some kind of flammable liquid in it that actually rotates due to the flame or electric heating element on the inside in the back of it. Now, when this is at past 3 degrees or past 5 degrees, there can be air bubbles that start in the tubing where that fluid rotates because of the heat, and it will stop the flammable material from actually rotating in a correct way. It will actually completely stop. And when the heat sits there on it long enough, it will cause the refrigerator overheat and cause fire. So that's why you always want to make sure, for the top number 1 reason, that this is always perfectly level as much as possible. The best way to check it, if anything in this RV is unlevel, I'm fine with it other than the refrigerator. I always put my phone in the freezer and set it on bubble level and check what the level is inside the freezer to check see if it's within 1 to 3% of grade or to even. Rule number 7. Now, this one is more of a suggestion. Some people don't listen to it, some people do it, but personally I won't do it. And that is running your RV with the propane turned on. And the reason why a lot of people do it is so when they're driving down the road, they can keep the refrigerator on. But here's what I say about that. When you're doing that, all your gas lines are open. Everything's running and hopefully running properly. But if we're driving down the road and we hit a rock or the gas line for some reason breaks because of a rock, or we hit something, or it comes loose, the issue is then you're releasing propane while you're driving, and that's a very dangerous idea, especially if something can blow up. And if you're running your fridge, you've got a flame running with that pilot light. So one suggestion for me is don't run your fridge. We just turn it on before we leave at the highest, coolest temperature possible, and we run it for a day and prep everything before we take off. That way it'll stay in there, it'll stay cool enough if you're getting to your location by the end of the day. And worst case scenario, very worst case scenario, and we've done it in the RV before too, is while we're on the road, we'll actually run the generator. Now, I know trailers don't have a generator, but a lot of RVs do. And with the RV, we'll run the generator while we're on the road. 2 reasons. If we're in 100-degree weather and we're trying to get to a location, but it's just hot in the back and our AC in the front cabin isn't cutting it, we'll run the generator, 1 for the fridge, and 2 to turn on the AC up on top as we're going down the road. And that's a lot safer than running the propane. So always just keep your propane off. For emergency reasons, we'll also put in just a few gallons. I know a lot of people don't want the weight, but we'll put in a few gallons of water. Be it if you're in a trailer, it's still a good idea, but in our motorhome, we'll run a few gallons of water in here just so in case of an emergency or we have to pull off to the side of the road, we have a little bit of water in case we need some. We have a blown tire, we're waiting for assistance, we have a breakdown. Cross our fingers it's never happened, but just having a little bit of water in the storage tank is always a good thing. Now, if you know you're going out to a dry campsite and you're not making any stops along the way that you can get fresh water at or potable water to put in here, then it's a good idea to run heavy and just fill it up all the way to begin with. But if you know you're going to a place that has water that you can fill with potable water, then we just put in a few gallons. Tire pressure. Now, with our RV, and it's going to be on backwards, but it says there, maintain air pressure tire for cold PSI at 80 pounds per square inch PSI. Now with ours, before we leave, I check and make sure every single tire is set at 80 pounds of pressure. Now the reason why it's a big thing is, especially with us, we have dualies. If these dualies aren't at the exact same pressure on both sides, you're going to be applying pressure to one tire or another, or even the other side, and it's going to cause issues. Now, to make sure that it's the most accurate, I have two ways of doing it. I actually run a tire pressure monitor gauge that's just the stick style, and it's a higher pressure one since it's 80 pounds, and I have it marked right where I know exactly the 80 pound pressure mark is. Don't rely on just having it read there. What I do is I got a electric or digital gauge also to make sure that they're both calibrated at the same. Now this is a new one on me, but I saw it on our trip just lately coming up. Always keep these ports free of any items, because these ports, like this one right here, is for the furnace. You set something up against it. One, it could cause a fire, but two, it's going to melt whatever you have in front of it. So that's a big issue. So we have this one here, which is the furnace. We also have one on the other side, which is the hot water tank. And when you do that, make sure that the hot water tank is clear. Don't put something up against it. And know that whatever is up against it could melt. And finally, it comes down to my last piece of advice, number 11, and it's going to be whoever's driving the RV, or at least backing it up into the campsite, is the rule maker, is the person in charge, is whatever you want to call it. But if you're camping with someone that's pulling in, or if you're with that person, leave them alone, step back, go somewhere else unless they ask for your help, or be on standby for them to ask for your help. And the reason why is when you have one or two or three people trying to tell this person how to back up or how to set up their camp, which they probably have done it a million times, or this may be their first time, you need to let them figure it out on their own and figure out their process. Because if you don't, they might forget something, or they might do something that will cause an accident, or could be even potentially dangerous. So again, never offer help unless it's asked for when you go to a campsite. First thing I do when my friends pull up, I step away, I am on standby, I don't even say anything except for, hey, if you need some help, let me know, I'll be back here, and I wait. They've got a process, they've got it figured out. If you go and interrupt them, you might screw up that process. Till next time, if you want to see anything in my RV, if you want to know anything more, let me know. Thank you very much.